I thought I would start and try to situate the conversation with a sort of higher level overview of how OpenAI approaches training what we call our foundation models. And I think that helps situate the conversation because each phase of model training relies on a slightly distinct set of data and then also provides opportunities to implement different kinds of privacy protections as the model is trained into a usable form that can actually be put into a service like ChatGPT. So at a high level, again, we generally talk about model training in a couple distinct phases, which are aptly named pre-training and post-training. I think this is fairly common terminology across the industry at this point. You will sometimes hear certain forms of post-training referred to as fine-tuning, but the basic concept is the same. To start with the pre-training phase, this is the part of model training in which we are trying to teach the system the sort of building blocks of language and intelligence. And we do this by showing it, as many of you will know, a very large and diverse set of information about the world. And this is the part of training, I think, that gets the most attention. It's also the part that requires a really enormous amount of computation and computational resources because the model needs to review each line from the training data and learn from this wide, diverse array of human knowledge so that it can begin to make connections between different words, different concepts, different ideas, different domains, and start to form the kind of building blocks of what we would think of as like a more conceptual intelligence. As many of you will know, being at this conference, the basic mechanism here, the sort of learning algorithm of this kind of neural network that powers something like ChatGPT is what researchers call next word or next token prediction. And this is where the model in the pre-training phase is tasked with predicting the next word in the training data over this enormous range of sequences. As you might imagine, it starts off being fairly poor at this. It's basically guessing words, random chance. But based on the mathematical operation of the model over this enormous range of sequences, it slowly gets better and better until at the end it can actually produce plausible sounding language in response to a wide range of requests based on what it's learned from the training data. And it does this, I think it's important to say again at a privacy conference, not by copying that training information into a database, not by copying that information into a model, but by reviewing that information and updating what researchers call the weights or the parameters of the AI that comprise the AI system to reflect the relationship between different words and then eventually different concepts and higher level ideas. And I think we'll have a chance to talk about some of the privacy protections that we build in here a bit later. So once pre-training is complete, you have what researchers call a base model. This is a pre-trained AI system that is actually not usable. So if you ever had the chance to interact with what we call a base model, it is effectively what it's been trained to do. It's a sort of sentence completion machine. You would put in some words and then it would just try to complete that sentence based on what it's learned about language from the training data, often in a fairly incoherent and frankly somewhat surreal way. It's really like a stream of consciousness at this point. And so this is where the post-training, the second phase, comes in, where the researchers are in effect taking what the model has learned about language, the language capabilities it's developed during the pre-training phase, and training it to use those capabilities to be a better conversationalist and also to behave in ways that humans might expect, sort of teach it towards what we would think of as ideal model behavior. And I sort of like to analogize this to sort of like a finishing school for an AI system in which the model is trained both to be conversational, in other words, to respond to somebody's questions or prompts, but also to not say things that would be considered unsafe. So for example, trained away from hate speech, and as we'll talk about in a bit, trained away from any requests that a user might input that would request private or sensitive information about another person. Comparatively speaking, post-training involves a relatively small, carefully engineered data set as compared to pre-training. This is largely what we call synthetic data It's information that in OpenAI's case, for example, we have contracted with experts to draft, for example, ideal responses of how an AI system would respond to a particular question. And then that ideal response, along with some rated potential model responses, is fed back in by our researchers to a number of post-training processes that over time progress the model towards a conversational and helpful form. The organization helped pioneer a bunch of these techniques, which are commonly referred to as reinforcement learning with human feedback, or RLHF, and they've become, fairly industry standard at this point across AI models and developers. And so at this point, you have a much more usable AI system. There's a much longer process after this where you are testing the safety, identifying different capabilities that the model has developed during these processes, designing and implementing risk mitigations, and then only after that extensive process do you actually have an AI system like GPT-4, for example, that you would put into a service, an actual like web service or app service like ChatGPT, and that is able to interact with people in a sort of conversational and helpful way. So that's a sort of high-level overview of how we would train something like GPT-4.